All right, welcome everybody. My name is David Stahl. I am a clinical professor at Stanford, and I am the former residency program director at The Ohio State University. This is our next episode of the PDs at Sea podcast, and I am very excited to have two of my former colleagues joining me today. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and we're going to get started.
All right, so I am Amy Bauman. I am the current residency program director at Ohio State. I was an assistant program director under Dr. Stahl for a couple of years and then took over once he left.
And I am Jared Spear, now former chief, officially retired from that role. Senior resident at OSU, who obviously came here under Stahl and then transitioned to work for Dr. Bauman just at the beginning of my CA3 year.
So the reason we wanted to put this episode together is program directors change all the time. In fact, the average duration of program directors, the last time this was studied was 2010, and that paper showed an average duration of about 3.7 years. So if you think about a 4-year residency, it's likely that you'll see a program director change during your time in residency. I suspect that number has actually fallen over time, that the turnover has gotten a little bit faster. And obviously there are some outliers who stay in that role for a really long time. But we wanted to kind of look at this idea of program director transition, both from the outgoing role, from the incoming role, and then from a resident role, and kind of explore that a little bit from an educational perspective. So, Jared, you're up.
Why did you decide to leave me? Like an abandoned child, I'm assuming it's all my fault.
So, you know, the decision to leave the program director's position was really challenging. It was probably one of the hardest career decisions I ever had to make. And there's, I could spend an hour talking just about that. I think to simplify it, it was really one of my mentors gave me the advice of kind of the Pareto principle, the idea that 80% of your outcomes come from 20% of your effort. So I felt like I had done 80% of what I wanted to accomplish in the residency. Like it was definitely not 100%. There was a lot that I left undone, as Dr. Bauman can tell you. But I felt like I had done a lot, and I felt like it was a good time. And at the same time, there were some other opportunities that came up that were appealing from both a geographic and career and family perspective. And so the combination of kind of all of those things made me feel like it was potentially time. And then when Dr. Bauman kind of agreed to be interested, I felt like, gosh, now I have like a good plan in place, and that made it even better. Amy, what was your initial reaction to being asked to consider the role?
Well, I think we need to take a step back and realize that not only did you leave your role, but the former associate program director who had been in that role for multiple years before I even joined the team as an APD also was going to leave around the time that you were. And so,
Good point.
the logical next step of progression would have probably been to him. And so it wasn't even on my radar that I might be the next man up, so to speak. And I had only been an assistant program director for 2 years. We're a very large residency, so it is quite the ship to navigate. And I, did not feel like I was going to be ready. I was not enthusiastic about it. I think I actually told you, no, I'm not going to do this multiple times. And
It's like converting to Judaism. You have to say no a couple times, and then
and even now today on the bad days, I'm just like, oh my goodness, what did I get myself into? But no, overall, it has been a pretty fulfilling career change for me.
what has been the hardest part about taking this role, or about the transition for you?
So we're a large residency program, and by function of that, there's always a problem going on, no matter what. It's just the reality of the job. It doesn't mean I'm doing something wrong. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with the program. It's just with a program of 76 residents, inevitably there is going to be something unexpected that comes up on like generally a daily basis. And sometimes feeling frustrated with that. I was very used to doing my work when I was at work and getting to go home and be at home. And this is really caused me to reevaluate my work-life balance, separation of work and life, what can wait. I'm someone, I'm an intensivist by nature, so I like to immediately intervene on things and fix them. And so trying to learn like what email can I wait to respond to until tomorrow. I would say that's like in the grand scheme of the nuts and bolts of the job, that's the hardest part. Um, Fortunately, I think we had a really good transition plan. So everyone says it takes a year to be in the role until you're really comfortable. Outside of those unexpected problems that crop up that we just never got a chance to talk through really, I actually feel reasonably prepared with like the cadence of how the year progresses and all the requirements and stuff like that.
Jared, I bet as chief resident, you've also had blurring of work-life balance and putting out your own share of fires that maybe neither Amy or I ever found out about. How did you figure that out or wade through that?
Um, it's an interesting question because I think when you become chief, you have to take on all of these new responsibilities. And similar to what Dr. Bauman was saying in terms of going home and realizing that there is no home anymore, people really feel like they have access to you at all times. But in addition to navigating that, we were also navigating this transition from you to Bauman. And so it was kind of twofold. And I think just talking about it from a bunch of different perspectives, because I've really had to think this through, I think over the course of a year in terms of what each class expected, what each level of resident expected, and then what that new expectation was going to be under Dr. Bauman. And I think that's challenging and it looks different for everybody. For us as chiefs, us meaning myself and Katie Cook, as well as Eric, were my co-chiefs. We knew you well.
Yeah.
A lot of us came here and you were a big part of that. And I think that has to do a lot. I think that's consistent with a lot of the residents in our program. You were a big part of that decision. And so not only did we come here because we found someone that we wanted to work for, but over the course of our training, we knew you well. We knew what your expectations were. We knew things that you wanted to know about our training, and we knew problems that we could handle on our own without having to communicate that to you. We knew how long our leash was, things that were appropriate, things that weren't. And when that transition happens, you have to relearn all of those things. As the senior residents, the thoughts from them were mostly, we've worked with both of you. We know both of you. We have 1 year left. We've gone through most of our training. This is probably going to be okay. And if it's not okay, it's only a year.
Yeah.
In contrast to that, you have CA2s who are starting their 2nd year of anesthesia training. And they really have to get into this vein of some of us have worked with Dr. Bauman. We think we know her. We definitely know Dr. Stahl. I'm not sure what this transition is going to look like. And I think that's anxiety provoking for a lot of them in terms of, is this program going to continue in the direction that I signed up for? And I think what they look for from a PD in those scenarios is guidance. Where are we going? Are we kind of on the same path? Are my rotations going to change? Are my call expectations going to change? Are you going to be somebody who pushes us to cover more areas and cover more call, or are we just going to be kind of business as usual? And I think that's consistent with the CA1s as well. But I think through every class, the big transition is we came here with expectations of who our leader is going to be and their vision for the mission. And I know that, or their vision for the program. And I know that myself, when I was interviewing for residency, asked every PD I interviewed with, where do you see the program in 5 years? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? And part of the reason I did that is because I wanted to work for someone I wanted to work for. And so I think especially for the interns to show up being like, I know where this program's going. I know who I'm going to work for. And then all of a sudden find out, oh, I'm working for somebody else. But there was a lot of anxiety. There was a lot of anxiety with the junior residents and with the intern class in terms of what is going to change? What should my expectations be? Because I signed up for a job knowing things and I don't know what the future is. It's not that the future is going to be different. It's that you don't know. And I think that's what most people worry about in that transition.
I interestingly was recruited by a PD who was my PD as an intern. And then it was like middle of June. I was getting ready to start in the OR July 1st as a CA1, and it was announced that there was going to be a program director change. So I did feel like I had pretty good perspective going through that process. My own experience, I think the program directors that I had were pretty different stylistically. And I got through that just fine. So I think being able to share that with the residents, and then also having that perspective of going through a similar change.
I think the huge benefit here was that you had essentially picked Dr. Bauman, which was huge. And so, we knew what we were getting to a certain degree because we trusted you. And, in hindsight, we were incredibly fortunate because I have interviewed now both in residency and fellowship at programs where PDs are kind of in a role that they maybe didn't want, still don't want, even though they're doing it. And, I can look back and say, no, I trained at a program under 2 PDs who want to be here and want to work for residents. And so that's something that's kind of intangible. And that's something that was critically important to the success of that transition, but it's not easy to coach. And that's that you have leaders that want to be there and want to work for the residents. And I think the want to is part of what drives the success. And we kind of went from somebody who wanted to be here to somebody who wanted to be here. So that was huge.
I feel like that's it, the anxiety around this, I think is key to appreciate and to recognize that it's also something that doesn't just go away right away. I also think, for anybody who's listening who might be deciding on a residency program, honestly, I think you got to know that there's a decent chance that this happens, and it's probably also going to be okay. Like the process, and we're not going to dive into the process of selecting a program director, but I can say it is rigorous. There's lots of checks and balances. It's unlikely that you get somebody who is really terrible in that role. It is a ton of work. So honestly, people who are terrible don't want to do it. And knowing, I think if you're trying to pick a program based on the nitty gritty details of the program, just know that the program director could change and a lot of those could change, as Jared mentioned. And so knowing up front that that what you're signing up for is not fixed in stone. And if you trust the people that you're working for and the other aspects of it, that is more likely to carry through over time than any specific rule or requirement or things like that. I feel like one of the biggest things on my mind when we were going through this was trying to announce, yes, this change is happening, but also, yes, we have a plan. Jared mentioned feeling like the chief resident role is often responsible to lots of different parties. Amy, have you felt like the same is true as program director? Because I think people who have never been in that role may not understand that it's not like you just work with the residents and that's all.
Yeah, and it's tricky because even some of those other people you do work with consistently, it just fluctuates in what they're asking you to do, how, they have competing interests they have to balance. So while they might be a resident advocate in one domain, in another domain, they're more of a roadblock, and that's challenging to navigate. Yeah, that administrative level of things, especially we're a big residency program. There's 76 residents. We're going to be up to 86 here in a couple of years when our full complement is rostered. We're just a big presence, and I kind of talked about this earlier in the vein of like the sky's always falling for someone, it feels like, but also administratively there's just always something happening that affects our residents because we are such a big piece of the puzzle. Yeah, I've been in on more committee meetings and other things than I really thought would be the case.
So for this next question, I want to give a little bit of a preamble to say I'm sensitive to the fact that a program director role is a privilege. I wouldn't have traded it for anything. It's also a position of power, and I think there's an inherent dynamic of power between residents and leadership. I also admit it is and was a really tough job. Somebody recently told me that leadership is just having a high tolerance for pain. And so, as you've stepped into this role, and Amy, what have been the hardest parts of the job so far?
I talked about this a little bit earlier, but again, just being able to take a step back and not get so caught up in the problems that I'm trying to solve, trying to prioritize what really is a crisis versus a problem that can be solved a little bit later. I also just really care about the residents and wanting to do a good job and being a perfectionist. So keeping myself from burning out, because I'm trying so hard, and just, being willing to let some things go. Yeah, I think I'm getting there. I feel very different about that after a year. Definitely still some room to grow. And I will be very open with my APDs and the chief residents. Like, if something happens and I feel very frustrated by it, I get a pulse check from them. Like, what's the group consensus here of, like, how we should be feeling about this? I really don't try to make my decisions in isolation, and I really try to listen and get input from lots of different places to kind of come up with a consensus plan when I can.
Yeah, I feel a lot of those same things. I feel like one of the challenges is the role can feel isolating at times. And so I think for current program directors, like leaning on others, asking other program directors for advice, your DIO or your chair when you can, I think that can really help. But it can feel, ultimately the buck stops with you. So like if somebody is supposed to do something and they don't do it, like
Yeah.
it all falls on you. And that can wear on you over time, especially when that thing that needed to get done happens to fall apart, like while you're on vacation or the first Saturday off after working 8 days in a row or whatever it is. And then now it falls in your lap as a last minute emergency. That's really challenging. I think for me, the biggest challenge was when residents struggled because, you know, it is inherently it's hard to push people. Um, it is harder to push people who don't feel like they need to be pushed or disagree with your assessment. And there's always self-doubt in that. Like, am I doing the right thing? Am I telling them the right thing? And wanting so much for them to be successful doesn't make it so. And so that feeling of like, gosh, I feel like I'm doing everything I can. I'm constantly thinking, can I be doing this better? But then sometimes it doesn't mean everyone's going to do great. And that is, it's hard. It can be exhausting. It's emotionally really taxing. My suspicion is that that is what ultimately leads a lot of PDs to leave the job eventually, is when they just feel like, man, emotionally I can't tackle that anymore. And so again, like shout out to the PDs on the podcast, but like reach out to others, recognize that you're not alone, and I think leverage those types of resources. Flipping it a little bit, Amy, what do you feel like is the best part about being program director?
So we have graduation this Saturday, and as I've sat down to think about what I want to talk about,
Jared is graduating, or we're not sure.
We're still 50-50 on it.
standing
Okay.
by. Uh, I worked with this group of CA3s a lot in the OR when they started as CA1s. I was an APD at the time and splitting my clinical FTE between the ICU and the OR. And they're like my equals now. Like, I would trust them in the OR, and it's just, I don't know. I don't think there's any period of growth in your life, probably maybe 0 to 12 months old, where you truly learn so much than what they've learned in the last couple years. So just getting to be a piece of that puzzle for them and see them get to this point has been really rewarding.
Really cool. I think for me, three different things stand out. I think one, and Jared kind of alluded to this, like when I saw a resident like at one point in their career and then I saw them again later, and the thing that I felt like they're struggling with the most early, then I see them be really successful at that later. Like a resident who was really quiet and struggled with kind of direct communication, then as a CA3 is like calling the surgeon in the OR and talking about moving this case and getting this done, or the resident who, really struggled procedurally, I see them just like nail a thoracic epidural with no problem. Like that was really fun to watch. I think then similarly, the residents who have come back or reached out over time, and I'll make a plug. Like if you're a resident, one of the greatest things you could do is call your old program director, email your old program director, and tell them how well you're doing, and thank them, because they will it will mean the world to them. But I have run into residents at meetings, at conferences, just randomly, and they've said, "Oh, look how great I'm doing now," or "Thanks for what I learned in the program." That means the world. And then the last thing, I think, we talked earlier about how there's always an emergency that comes up as program director, and I feel like I think when Amy took over, I was like, okay, 80 residents, everyone has something happen in their life once or twice a year, just generally, could be small or big. So that's 160 to 120 to 160 events a year. There's only 365 days in a year. So every third day, you're going to have something come up. But, I fortunately or unfortunately had residents have, major, from great, wonderful things like getting engaged, getting married, to horrible, scary things happen. And I feel like the best part about being program director was when I felt like I could leverage all these resources to support that person through that hard time, and hopefully make it a little bit easier for them or impact them. I felt like that was really meaningful to be able to do. So with great power comes great responsibility, I think. One of the questions I sometimes get asked is, like, somebody will say, "Hey, I'm a resident, or I'm a junior faculty, and I think I want to be a program director in the future." And so I'm curious, for both of you, what advice would you give that person?
Coming from someone who never had that aspiration and is now in this position, it's a little bit challenging for me to answer. But I think even as an APD, like, you did so much as the PD that I had no idea about. And so I think just like being open to, being CC'd on an email thread, for example, to see how did you answer this complaint that you got? Like, how did you navigate this? Just trying to pick up bits and pieces as much as possible so that you can work on your own communication skills, leadership, like all those intangibles is what you need, because like the specific problems you can't prepare for, those are going to be so variable. I think it's developing all those other skills that you need to solve them, and you can do that in many different avenues, not just being an assistant PD, but you got to like be open to not just clocking in and clocking out, if that makes sense.
I think as I became APD, I was like, "Oh, this is like it both terrifying and exciting." Like, I felt like it's the greatest thing about being APD is like you can have responsibility over small pieces and not all the responsibility. The benefit about being PD is you do get all the responsibility, but you get all the challenges that come with it. Um, I felt like when I talk to people who ask this question, I try to tell them, like, I think working on being a great clinician, working on being a great educator are like the foundational things of being a program director, and then building your leadership skills about like how do you communicate, how can you be organized, get tasks done. Uh, all of those things will position you in a position where if the role comes up, you'll be able to get it. But also, there's a lot of other roles that are the same or similar job to a program director in different settings, right? So like being a director of a medical student rotation is a lot like being a mini program director in your own right. Like being a fellowship program director or an APD. Like there are other undergraduate medical education and graduate medical education roles that are PD adjacent, because the program director role may or may not come up at the right time in your life in a given place where you are. And so keeping your eyes or mind open to other opportunities as well as the program director role, I think, are great. And then realizing that, I think, like Amy did, you're probably never ready for that job. And so if it comes up and people think you're good for it, you're probably good for it. And I think it's worth a try because it can be incredibly rewarding. All right. Any last minute thoughts? Well, I want to thank Dr. Bauman and Dr. Spear for being with us today. And we'll see you guys next time.